Hello, my name is Emmanuel Anama-Green, and I am a graduate student at the University of Cumberland in Williamsburg, Kentucky. I just received my Doctor of Education degree in December of 2020, and this presentation will be a poster presentation about my research for the dissertation. The title of the presentation is The Association Between Preferred Teaching Styles and Perspectives About Accommodations for English Language Learners. This, of course, is a poster, but as you can kind of see, the print is very small. So I'm going to try to break that apart into slides so that you can see it more clearly. So the problem and background. This particular research study examined how the teaching styles of educators in the Eastern Kentucky region of Appalachia related to their instruction of English language learners in their regular classroom settings. Now, while the teaching of English language learners in regular classes is, of course, a nationwide topic, there's really not been a lot of research in this particular region of Appalachia related to teaching styles and how those relate to the instruction of ELLs. I had 4 research questions for my dissertation. The first one, of course, was how do Eastern Kentucky P-12 educators' beliefs about inclusion of English language learners relate to their dominant teaching style? The second one, of course, was what is the association between perspectives on English language learner coursework modifications and teaching styles among Eastern Kentucky P-12 educators? And then how do Eastern Kentucky P-12 educators' ELL-related professional development activities relate to their dominant teaching style? And finally, which teaching styles predict Eastern Kentucky P-12 educators' willingness to modify coursework for ELL students? Okay, so you can kind of see from the research questions that many of those were correlational questions, as well as some linear regression models as well. Now, the applicability to higher education, as you can kind of see previously, there were connections to P-12, but how does this really apply to higher education in general? Well, Gracia, who is a publisher of one of the instruments that I used for my research, he actually used the teaching styles inventory in higher education settings. That was primarily what he developed it with. This particular research study examined how an educator's style of teaching relates to their willingness to provide modifications for ELLs. And the second instrument, of course, was Reeves. She published that instrument in 2006. Additionally, teacher preparation programs at the post-secondary level could really benefit from the findings, hopefully, and can use those when they help develop their plan, or the programs, and refine those. Something interesting when I did the live presentation that was highlighted is that not all states require coursework in teaching English language learners. For example, Kentucky, where I'm from, actually does not require, unless the university inserts it, a coursework or course for teaching English language learners, which is actually somewhat problematic whenever you get into the regular classroom and the teacher has never had a course related to second language acquisition, how to teach someone who's learning a second language, and so forth. So that there are some connections to that as well. Additionally, this could potentially provide some resources for you that universities and state departments of ed could work together to ensure that ELLs have that equitable instruction from qualified instructors. The research study overview, of course, is, like I mentioned earlier, ELLs in regular classes, of course, is a nationwide topic, but limited research has been conducted in this particular region of Appalachia and Eastern Kentucky related to the teaching styles of educators and how such styles, of course, relate to the instruction of ELLs in the educators' classes. As I mentioned earlier, Gracia's research was at the post-secondary level, and he theorized that there are 5 styles of teaching, namely the expert, formal authority, personal model, facilitator, and delegator. As I previously mentioned, this research study, of course, examined how an educator's style of teaching relates to their willingness to provide modifications for ELLs. The second instrument, of course, was published by Reeves in 2006. This is my theoretical framework, of course, and the premise of my research was the quality of instruction for English language learners. I wanted to find if there was a connection or correlation between a teacher's dominant teaching style and their professional development activities for ELLs, the knowledge of effective instruction for ELLs, second language acquisition studies and so forth, willingness to modify instruction, and of course inclusion of ELLs in their classrooms. So I wanted to see if there's a connection there. And again, it's all related to the overarching theme of quality of instruction for ELLs. My methodology, of course, it was a quantitative perspective, or quantitative study, I should say. The participants completed 2 different instruments, one by Gracia and one by Reeves, and then a demographic questionnaire. The first instrument, like I mentioned, is the ESL Students in Mainstream Classroom Survey of Teachers. And the second one, of course, was from Gracia, the Teaching Styles Inventory, the version 3.0. Both the instruments, of course, were consolidated into one single quantitative instrument in which the Teaching Styles Inventory by Gracia was presented first, and the ESL Students in Mainstream Classroom Survey by Reeves was presented second. Demographic questions, of course, included non-personally identifiable information related to participants and their population, and those, of course, used to help group by variables and so forth in analyses. The sampling procedure and data collection, the participants, they got to take the combined survey. They were given a link. It took them to a Typeform survey. Typeform, if you're not familiar with it, is somewhat similar to SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics in some ways, also to Google Forms if you use that program. But Typeform I found to be very helpful for this particular study. Prior to the actual survey questions, those, of course, were by Reeves and Gracia. The participants were asked some basic demographic data questions to really figure out where they were in the region, which regional cooperative that they were connected to, and how that really related to their other demographic data and so forth. Typeform, of course, also helped with data collection in general. And then this one right here, lo siento. And here we go. The participants, of course, they answered that qualifying question to make sure that they were in the service regions of the educational cooperatives. So it was limited to those particular cooperatives. It was a combined survey, and initially the survey instrument basically was open for a period of 1 month, closing around midnight, the last day of the month of the study. I did have to extend that by a couple of weeks due to a lack of responses. In the pandemic, it was also part of this time period. So, teachers were taking the survey, if I'm not mistaken, in May of last year, which was shortly after the pandemic had started. It was April, May, and as you can imagine, that was a challenging time. So there were some issues there, which caused it to be extended. However, following that extension, I had more than enough survey responses after applying the methodology and so forth. The participants in the research study, the sampling for this study was conducted in the Eastern Kentucky region of Appalachia. The participants were selected with the assistance of the regional educational cooperatives in the region. The 2 particular educational cooperatives that assisted with the study were the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, or KVEC, and the Southeast South Central Educational Cooperative, or SESC. Now, if you're not familiar with what the educational cooperatives are, they're basically cooperatives that help different member school districts throughout their region. The school districts contributed to the cooperative, and they work together in a collaborative effort to provide accommodations, provide even bidding, provide lots of things for those schools. KVEC, for example, they work with 22 different member school districts in Eastern Kentucky. If you think about SESC, they work with 27 member school districts in Eastern Kentucky to provide special education professional services. There's a little caveat to that, though, and basically SESC, they provide additional PD opportunities for the 21 of those districts. 6 of those districts that they work with receive their other services from other different educational cooperatives. For example, I teach in Harlan County, Kentucky, in addition to my graduate studies, of course, and our school district actually uses KVEC, which is the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, for their primary cooperative services, but they work with SESC for their special education services. So each of the cooperatives, of course, sent the survey out to their email distribution list of P12 educators in the region. The results of the study were as follows. For research question 1, the decision was made to reject the null hypothesis that there's no relationship between the educator's belief about inclusion and their dominant teaching style, and of course accept that directional hypothesis that educators' beliefs about inclusion are, of course, associated with their dominant teaching styles. The reason, of course, let's explain why that was. When I did the ANOVA analysis for the teaching style expert, they were significant at the F10 at 2.33 level, basically when you consider that 0.05 level of significance there. And there was a significant difference, of course, for the expert teaching style. The other styles, of course, did not really have that. So the decision, of course, was made to reject that null hypothesis because at least one of those 5 styles showed a significant difference. When you look at research question 2, the decision on that one was made to fail to reject the null hypothesis for research question 2. None of those results were statistically significant. There was a small correlation between the facilitator teaching style and the educator's perspectives on coursework modifications, but it was a very low correlation at 0.19. The same with research question 3. The decision was made, of course, to fail to reject the null hypothesis that an educator's dominant teaching style might relate to how they obtain PD-related ELLs. That was, of course, based on the fact that none of the analyses for the ANOVAs were significant at the 0.05 level. The Pearson correlation coefficient analysis revealed that there were some statistical significance items for the delegator and personal model teaching styles. However, those correlations were very low at 0.17 and 0.17 for both of those. For research question 4, the decision was made to fail to reject the null hypothesis, and this, of course, was made because none of the R values were near the 1.0 value. The results from the ANOVA analyses were not statistically significant, as we mentioned earlier with different questions. One of the individual teaching styles, of course, facilitator, was statistically significant in the linear regression analyses that were conducted, but overall the 5 styles, even though they might be near those, they were not near the 1.0 level when it comes to linear regression. So in conclusion, like I mentioned, this study researched the relationship between a teacher's dominant teaching style and the instruction of ELLs. With the exception of research question 1, as I mentioned earlier, the decision was made to fail to reject the null hypotheses. Research question 1, it examined the relationship between an educator's dominant teaching style and their attitudes toward the inclusion of ELLs in their regular classroom settings. And after reviewing those results for research question 1, we found that the expert teaching style from Grash's series, of course, might show connections to an educator's attitudes toward the inclusion of students who are ELLs, according to the instrument provided by Reeves and their classroom setting. The results, of course, did suggest that educators with an expert teaching style might be more positive toward the inclusion of ELLs in their classes, using those 2 instruments by the 2 educational theorists there. And then the characteristics of these, of course, could show a connection possibly toward the inclusion of ELLs in classes. Now, considering the facilitator and the expert teaching styles showed some connections to pedagogics instruction or teachers' instruction of ELLs, future studies, of course, could include variables that focus on these 2 teaching styles, in correlating, of course, with the instruction of ELLs. And potential studies might even include, for example, how these 2 teaching styles have characteristics that could impact the instruction of English language learners. Other studies might include the relationship of the 2 teaching styles to their PD options and so forth, because teachers do have to pursue PD options as required by their school district and, of course, state and federal statutes, at least state in Kentucky. So how did those really relate? And in my particular school district, we're given a little latitude with the options we choose. So do teachers, when they have that option to choose PD options, how did that relate, of course, to ELL? So that could be a potential study for the future. My references are here on this link. There are about 29 pages of those. Of course, I put those in a Google Drive link, and I also shared those with the recorded video for this presentation. And my contact information is as follows. There's my email address for the University of Cumberland, or my personal email address, my cell phone number. My dissertation chair was Dr. Jessica Nichols, and her email address is jessica.nichols@ucumberland.edu. My dissertation committee members were Dr. Janet Meeks and Dr. Carla Beth Hargis, and there's, of course, their email addresses, janet.meeks@ucumberland.edu and carla.hargis@ucumberland.edu. I thank you again for your time and attention, and it was a pleasure to share this presentation with you. Thank you.